It was a cool evening, the kind that made the air feel calm but carried a quiet buzz of excitement. The town auditorium glowed with lights as people filled the seats chatting loudly, eager for the annual talent show to begin. Families had come with children, couples with snacks, and groups of friends whispering predictions about who might win this year. It was the biggest event in the small city, where anyone could step onto that stage and show what they had. The curtains were drawn, and the host walked out with a big smile. He cracked a few jokes, made the audience laugh, and introduced the first few performers, a group of young dancers, a magician with shiny cards, and a teenage singer who sang a pop song everyone knew by heart. The crowd cheered, clapped, and shouted names, giving loud support to people they recognized. But somewhere behind the curtain, standing quietly in the line of nervous participants, was a middle-aged woman in a plain floral dress. Her hands were shaking slightly as she held a small microphone, waiting for her turn. She wasn't wearing any makeup except a little lip color, and her hair was neatly tied back, showing faint lines of tiredness across her face. While others were adjusting fancy costumes and practicing confident poses, she stood still, her eyes focused on the ground. She had never been on a stage this big before. In fact, she had barely sung in front of anyone other than her children. Yet something inside her told her that tonight had to happen. She didn't come for fame or trophies. She came because she needed to prove to herself that it wasn't too late to follow a dream she'd buried long ago. As the host called her name, she took a deep breath. Her heart pounded hard in her chest. She could feel it in her throat, almost making it hard to breathe. The curtain slowly opened, and she walked into the bright light of the stage. The spotlight hit her, making her blink several times. At first, the room went silent. The audience looked at her, not with curiosity, but with a mix of confusion and amusement. Some teenagers sitting near the front row nudged each other and started whispering. One of them laughed quietly, pointing toward her old-fashioned shoes. A woman in the third row tilted her head and whispered to her friend, "Is she serious? She looks like someone's aunt who got lost backstage." Even one of the judges, a man known for his sharp comments, leaned over and murmured something to the other judges. They all gave polite smiles, but it was clear none of them expected much. The woman, however, didn't say anything. She didn't even look at them. She simply adjusted the microphone stand, her fingers trembling slightly, and stood still, waiting for the signal to begin. The host tried to lighten the mood. "So what will you be doing for us tonight?" he asked with a bright grin. She cleared her throat softly. Her voice was gentle but steady. "I'll be singing," she said. "Wonderful," he replied. "And what's the song?" She paused for a moment, looking down, then quietly said, "It's one I wrote myself." A small wave of laughter ran through the crowd. Not cruel, but dismissive. The kind of laugh people give when they think something is going to be awkward. The host smiled, trying to keep things friendly. "Well then," he said, "the stage is yours." The lights dimmed slightly, leaving her in a soft spotlight. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her. Her palms were sweaty, and her heart raced faster than she ever thought possible. For a second, she almost stepped back. But then, in that tiny pause, she remembered something. A memory of her late husband sitting by the window, smiling at her years ago as she hummed a tune while doing dishes. He had told her once, "You have a voice that can make people feel what words can't." That memory steadied her. The music started. A simple piano melody filled the room. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then slowly she began to sing. At first, her voice was soft, fragile, like it could break at any moment. But as the first verse ended, something inside her shifted. Her tone grew stronger, smoother, warmer, filled with emotion that seemed to flow from somewhere deep in her heart. It wasn't a perfect voice, not polished like professional singers, but it carried something rare: honesty. People in the audience stopped whispering. Some leaned forward. The laughter faded completely. Her song told a story about love, loss, and holding on to hope when life takes everything away. It was about saying goodbye to someone who once made the world feel full of color and learning to live again in the gray silence left behind. The melody rose gently, then fell again like waves, and every word seemed to touch something inside the people listening. Even the judges, who had seemed so sure she would fail, were watching quietly now. The woman who had laughed earlier lowered her head, her eyes glistening. The teenagers in the front row were silent, no longer smirking. The hall felt still, not from boredom but from something else, something rare that filled the air with emotion. As the song neared its end, the woman's voice cracked slightly, not from weakness but from real feeling. She let the last note hang in the air, trembling softly, before fading into silence. For a moment no one moved. The piano stopped. The spotlight dimmed, and the entire room was silent as if holding its breath. Then slowly a sound began, a single clap, then another. And within seconds the whole room erupted into applause. People stood up clapping hard, some shouting words of praise. The woman looked up, her eyes wide. She hadn't expected this. Her lips trembled, and for the first time that night, she smiled, a small, humble smile, the kind that comes from someone who doesn't believe she deserves all that attention. The host returned to the stage, clearly emotional himself. "Wow," he said softly into the microphone. "I don't think any of us saw that coming." The crowd continued to cheer. The judges were standing now. The same man who had doubted her earlier nodded slowly, a faint smile replacing his skeptical frown. Backstage, other performers watched with awe. Some whispered, "She's amazing." Others looked ashamed for having laughed earlier. As she walked off the stage, she was still in a daze. A young stage assistant rushed over and said, "That was beautiful. You made people cry out there." She smiled shyly. "Really?" she asked softly. The assistant nodded quickly. "Really? I think you just stole the show." When she reached the dressing area, she sat down on a small bench, holding the edge of her dress in her hands. Her heart was still pounding, but not from fear anymore, from joy. For the first time in years, she felt seen. She felt heard. She thought of her children who had begged her not to feel nervous. She thought of her husband's old words echoing in her mind. "You have a voice that can make people feel." He had been right. She just hadn't believed it until now. Outside, the audience was still talking about her. People who had laughed minutes earlier were now telling each other how unexpectedly powerful her voice was. How her song made them think of their own loved ones, their own losses. One man was overheard saying, "You can tell she lived every word she sang." Another woman, wiping away tears, whispered to her friend, "I feel guilty for judging her before she even started." Meanwhile, backstage, the host came over to find her. "That was incredible," he told her sincerely. "You really moved everyone out there." She smiled again, modest and quiet. "Thank you," she said simply. He tilted his head. "I think people will remember this night for a long time." When she stepped outside the building later, the cool night air hit her face. She stood on the sidewalk looking up at the stars. For a moment she felt small, but in a good way. Small in a world that suddenly felt full of possibility again. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't care if she won the competition or not. All that mattered was that she had done it. She had faced her fear, stood before a crowd that doubted her, and let her heart speak through music. As she walked to the bus stop, her phone buzzed with a message from her daughter. It said, "Mom, I saw you. You were amazing." Tears filled her eyes as she read those words. She typed back, "Thank you, sweetheart. I just sang for your dad tonight." When she got home, she took off her shoes, made a cup of tea, and sat by the window where her husband used to sit. The house was quiet, but her heart wasn't. It was full of warmth, courage, and something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. That night, videos of her performance began to spread online. People shared it with captions like "Never judge a book by its cover" and "This woman's song will touch your heart." The world didn't know who she was yet, but they would soon. She had stepped onto that stage as a woman everyone laughed at, but left as someone who reminded them what true beauty and strength really sounded like. And though she didn't say it out loud, in her heart she whispered, "Thank you," to the man she still loved, to the music that never left her, and to herself, for finally being brave enough to sing. Long before the night of that unforgettable performance, her life had been nothing but quiet struggles wrapped in small hopes. Every morning began the same way. The soft sound of the alarm clock before sunrise, a cup of tea that had gone cold before she even had time to drink it, and the long walk to the small bakery where she worked. She tied her apron carefully, greeted customers with a polite smile, and spent hours serving others while her own dreams sat silent inside her heart. She wasn't bitter. Life had taught her to be grateful for little things: a roof over her head, 2 children who loved her, and a job that paid just enough to keep the lights on. But when she was alone, especially late at night after finishing her chores, she would sit near the window with a small notebook in her lap. That was where her secret world lived, pages filled with songs she had written over the years. Some were happy, some were sad, but all of them were pieces of her life captured in simple words. Music had always been her escape. As a child, she would sing while sweeping the floor or helping her mother hang laundry in the sun. Her mother used to smile and say, "You sing like you mean it." Back then, she dreamed of standing on a big stage, maybe even recording a song one day. But like most dreams, that one slowly faded under the weight of real life. After finishing school, she started working early to support her parents. Years passed, and she got married to a man who was kind and hardworking. They built a small life together. Nothing fancy, but full of laughter and understanding. He used to call her "my little singer," and often asked her to sing after dinner while he strummed his old guitar. Those were the happiest nights. Their house wasn't big, but it was always filled with warmth and sometimes with music. When their first child was born, she stopped singing for herself. Life became busy. There were bills to pay, diapers to change, and sleepless nights filled with crying and rocking the baby to sleep. Her husband worked double shifts, and she started helping out at the bakery to keep things going. Music became something she remembered, not something she lived. Still, every now and then she would hum quietly while cooking, and he would smile and say, "You still have it." Then, one winter evening, everything changed. Her husband came home looking pale and tired. He brushed it off as nothing, but deep down she felt something was wrong. Within months, illness took hold of him, and their days became filled with hospital visits, medicines, and prayers. Through it all, he kept telling her, "Don't stop singing. Promise me you'll sing again even when I'm not there to hear it." She would smile through her tears and say, "You'll always hear it." But the day he passed away, her voice went silent. For months after that, she couldn't even listen to music. Every song reminded her of him. Every melody felt like a piece of her breaking all over again. She worked harder than ever to keep her children fed, trying not to show them her pain. At night, when the house was quiet, she sat by the same window they used to share and stared into the darkness, listening to the echo of memories. Her heart hurt, but she never let anyone see how deep the hurt went. One night, while cleaning an old box, she found the little notebook full of songs she had written years ago. The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly faded, but the words still carried the same warmth. She ran her fingers over the pages, whispering the lyrics softly. Her eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't stop them from falling. That night she sang again, just a few lines, just for herself. The sound of her own voice startled her. It was shaky and rusty, but it was still hers. After that night, she began to sing quietly whenever she felt lonely. Sometimes while cooking dinner, sometimes when hanging clothes under the open sky, and slowly her voice began to heal something inside her. It didn't take away the pain, but it made her feel alive again. Her children noticed. "Mom, you sing better than the people on TV," her younger one once said, and she laughed softly, brushing the child's hair. "I just sing for your dad," she replied. Years passed that way, simple, quiet, steady. But deep down, she always remembered the promise she made to her husband. She had told him she would sing again, not just for herself, but for others too. The thought scared her, but it also gave her a reason to keep moving forward. She wanted to show her children that dreams don't expire just because life gets hard. Then one afternoon, while she was at work, a coworker mentioned the town's annual talent show. It wasn't a big competition, just a local event where people came to sing, dance, or perform for fun. "You should go for it," the coworker said casually. She laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. "Me? I'm too old for that," she said. But that night she couldn't stop thinking about it. When she told her children about the show, they got excited immediately. "You have to do it, Mom. You always tell us to be brave. Now it's your turn." Their words made her smile, but also made her nervous. It had been so many years since she'd sung in front of anyone. Still, something inside her whispered that it was time. She spent the next few weeks after work practicing quietly in her kitchen. Sometimes she would close her eyes and imagine that her husband was sitting across from her, nodding along like he used to. She even wrote a new song, one that told their story. It was simple, about love that doesn't end, about holding on to memories that keep you going. She knew it wasn't perfect, But it came from her heart, and that was enough. The day of the talent show arrived faster than she expected. She barely slept the night before. Her children laid out her dress and helped her fix her hair. "You look beautiful," her daughter said, handing her a small pin that used to belong to their father. "Wear this," the child whispered. "For luck." She pinned it carefully to her dress, feeling her heart tighten. "For luck," she repeated softly. When she reached the auditorium, the crowd, the lights, the noise, everything felt overwhelming. Backstage was full of young performers, buzzing with energy, talking loudly, taking selfies, and laughing. She stood in the corner quietly, holding her hands together. A few people looked at her curiously. Some even smiled politely, but most didn't pay her much attention. The host came by, checking the list of names, and looked surprised when he saw her. "You're up soon," he said kindly, though there was a hint of doubt in his voice. She nodded and smiled faintly. Inside she was terrified. Her knees felt weak, her stomach tight, but she kept thinking of her husband's words. "Don't stop singing." That was all she needed to hear. As she waited, she heard laughter and applause for the performers before her. Each one seemed confident, full of charm. She could hear the judges giving encouraging comments. When her name was finally called, she closed her eyes and took one long breath. Her children were sitting somewhere in the crowd, cheering silently for her. That thought gave her courage. Then came the moment she walked onto the stage. The laughter, the whispers, the doubtful looks. It all happened so fast, but in her mind it felt like slow motion. The bright lights, the faces staring at her, the sound of someone giggling. They all melted into one blur. She could have turned back. She could have left. But she didn't. She remembered why she was there. She remembered that she wasn't singing for approval. She was singing to keep a promise. When the music began and her voice finally filled the hall, it was more than just a song. It was a piece of her life being shared with strangers. Every note carried years of pain and love. Every word came from memories that shaped her. She didn't need to impress anyone. She just needed to sing. For him, for her children, for herself. After her performance, when the applause roared through the hall, she realized something important. All those years of silence, fear, and self-doubt had led her to that single moment. The moment when she found her voice again. Not the perfect voice of a trained singer, but the voice of someone who had lived, loved, lost, and still dared to stand tall. Later that night, when she reached home, her children hugged her tightly, their eyes full of pride. "You did it, Mom," they said. She smiled and whispered, "We did it." As she stood by the window once more, the same place where her story had paused years ago, she felt peace. The promise was kept. The song had finally been heard. Outside, the world went on as usual, cars passing, dogs barking in the distance. But inside that small home, something beautiful had awakened again. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was real, and for the first time in many years, she didn't feel invisible anymore. The moment the first note of the piano echoed through the hall, time seemed to slow down for her. She stood still, gripping the microphone tightly, her breath trembling slightly as the melody wrapped around her like a soft blanket. The light above her felt warm and heavy, but for the first time that night she didn't feel afraid. She closed her eyes and let the music guide her. Her voice began softly, almost like a whisper, fragile and trembling, as if unsure whether it belonged there. But soon something inside her shifted. Her tone deepened, steadied, and the words flowed from her heart like a quiet river. Every lyric she sang came from years of hidden pain, from love lost and promises kept, from silent nights and lonely mornings. At first, the crowd didn't know what to think. The murmurs had stopped, but the air was thick with expectation. People had laughed when she walked on stage, but now, not a single sound came from the audience. Her voice filled the space gently, reaching even the farthest corners of the auditorium. She sang about losing someone you love, but still feeling their presence in every small thing, in the wind, in a song, in a memory. Her words painted pictures of heartbreak and hope all at once. The melody rose and fell, carrying the emotions of someone who had lived through pain but refused to let it define her. Halfway through the song, her eyes opened slightly and she saw the crowd. Faces that had been full of doubt now looked stunned, their expressions softening. The teenagers in the front row who had giggled earlier were leaning forward, their smiles gone, replaced with quiet awe. A woman in the middle rows wiped her eyes. One of the judges had put down his pen and was watching her intently. Her confidence grew with each line. It wasn't about showing off her voice anymore, it was about telling her story. She didn't sing like a professional. She sang like someone who meant every word. Her tone wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that realness was what reached people's hearts. Then came the part of the song she feared most, the verse she wrote for her late husband. Her voice trembled as she began. "You're gone, but you never really left. Your laughter still lives in the walls of this home." The hall grew silent, utterly still. She felt her throat tighten. For a moment she almost couldn't continue. Her eyes filled with tears and her voice cracked slightly, but that small crack only made it more beautiful. It was the kind of moment where honesty overpowered perfection. She pressed her hand gently against her chest and sang through the emotion. Her tears caught in the light and her voice soared higher, carrying every ounce of love she still held for the man she had lost. In the audience, people began to cry quietly. The woman in the third row leaned on her friend's shoulder, whispering, "That's how my mom used to sing to my dad." Even the host, standing near the side of the stage, looked down, his eyes watery. The man who had laughed earlier in the crowd had his head lowered, his hands folded in his lap, listening like he didn't want to miss a single note. As the song reached its final chorus, her voice grew stronger. The piano music swelled, matching her emotion. It wasn't just her story anymore. It became everyone's story. It spoke to anyone who had ever lost someone, to anyone who had ever been underestimated, to anyone who had been afraid to dream again. The last note lingered in the air, trembling like a heartbeat. She held it just long enough for the audience to feel its weight, then let it fade into silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. There was no clapping, no shouting, no sound at all. It was as if everyone was frozen in that shared feeling. Then suddenly someone stood up and began to clap. Another followed, and then another. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet, the sound of applause echoing like thunder. She blinked in disbelief. The same people who had laughed minutes earlier were now cheering, shouting, clapping with tears in their eyes. The woman on stage stood there almost overwhelmed, her lips trembling into a shy smile. She looked down for a moment, covering her face with one hand, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. The host walked back onto the stage, his usual playful tone replaced with quiet admiration. He said into the microphone, "Sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that come from the heart." "You've just reminded us of that," the audience roared again. Some people shouted words like "beautiful" and "sing it again." She smiled softly and shook her head, still too emotional to speak. The judges stood up one by one, giving her a standing ovation. The same judge who had doubted her earlier leaned into the microphone and said, "You didn't just sing a song tonight, you told a story that we all felt." That was pure emotion. Her eyes glistened as she bowed her head in gratitude. The lights above her dimmed slightly, and she took one last look at the audience before walking off stage. Backstage, a few performers ran up to her. One young girl said with wide eyes, "You made me cry. I didn't think music could do that." She smiled warmly and replied softly, "Music can do anything when it's honest." The people who had ignored her earlier now looked at her with respect. Some offered hugs. Some apologized for judging her. She accepted them all with quiet grace, never once showing pride and only thankfulness. As she sat alone for a moment backstage, the sound of the applause still echoing faintly in her ears, she looked down at the small pin on her dress, the one her daughter had given her for luck. She touched it gently and whispered, "We did it." Her hands were still shaking, but now it wasn't fear. It was disbelief mixed with joy. She thought about her husband and the promise she made. Maybe he couldn't be there in person, but in that moment she could almost feel him. Maybe somewhere he had been listening too. When she stepped outside later that evening, the air was cool and the streetlights glowed softly against the quiet sky. She sat on a bench near the building, still dressed in her floral dress, and watched people leaving the auditorium. She heard their voices, people talking about her performance, replaying moments, describing how her song made them remember their own loved ones. A little girl walked by with her mother and pointed toward her, whispering, "Mom, that's the lady who sang." The mother smiled kindly and said, "You were wonderful. Thank you for that." The woman smiled back, whispering, Thank you for listening. Later, as she waited for her bus, a few more people approached her. A man with gray hair told her, "My wife passed away last year. Your song brought her back for a few minutes tonight." His voice broke slightly and he gave her a small nod before walking away. She stood there quietly, not knowing what to say, her eyes full of tears again. The bus ride home felt unreal. She sat by the window, watching the city lights pass by, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. She didn't feel like the same person who had walked nervously onto that stage. Something inside her had changed. The laughter, the doubt, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was that she had shared her truth and people had felt it. When she reached home, her children were waiting at the door. They ran up to her, hugging her tightly, talking all at once. "Mom, everyone loved you. You were amazing. We saw people crying." She laughed softly, still holding them close. "I was so scared," she said honestly. "But I thought of your dad and somehow I just sang." They sat together that night, replaying the video one of the organizers had shared online. Even through the small phone screen, the magic of the moment could still be felt. She watched herself singing, the trembling hands, the soft smile, the tears, and she barely recognized that woman. By the next morning, the video had already begun spreading online. People were sharing it everywhere, leaving comments like, "This is what real music sounds like, and I didn't expect to cry tonight, but I did." Some said her story inspired them to chase their own forgotten dreams. Others said it reminded them to be kinder, to never judge someone by how they look. As she read some of the messages, she smiled quietly. She hadn't done any of it for attention. She hadn't even imagined that anyone outside that hall would ever hear her sing. But somehow, her voice had reached farther than she ever thought possible. For the first time in many years, she felt like her life had come full circle. She had loved deeply, lost painfully, and now, in a way she never planned, she had found her voice again. That night, as she looked out her window, the same one she used to stare from during her loneliest nights, she whispered softly, "I sang for you, and they finally heard me." The stars above shimmered faintly, and though the world outside was quiet, her heart was louder than ever, full of peace, gratitude, and a gentle kind of joy that only comes after years of silence finally being broken. The next morning, the world looked the same, but her life had quietly begun to change. The sun rose like any other day, light slipping through her curtains, falling across the same table where she had her tea every morning. But as she sat there, holding the warm cup in her hands, she felt something new inside, a strange calm mixed with disbelief. The night before had felt like a dream, something so unreal that she half expected to wake up and find that none of it had happened. But then her phone began buzzing nonstop. Messages flooded in, from neighbors, coworkers, even people she hadn't spoken to in years. "I saw your performance," one text read. "You made me cry," said another. When she opened social media, her heart nearly stopped. There it was, a video of her performance already shared thousands of times. Someone had recorded her entire song and posted it online, writing in the caption, "She walked on stage and everyone laughed." Then she opened her mouth and made the whole world cry. She watched it with tears in her eyes. The shaky video captured every moment, the nervous way she held the microphone, the quiet start of her voice, the emotion that built with every line. She could see the audience rising to their feet, clapping, crying, cheering. Watching herself like that didn't feel real. It felt like watching someone else, a version of her that had been hidden deep inside, waiting to be found. Her children came running into the room. "Mom, you're on the internet. Everyone's talking about you," they shouted, their voices full of excitement. She laughed softly, brushing her hair back, unsure how to react. That's crazy," she said, shaking her head. By afternoon, her video had gone viral. Local news pages were sharing it. People left comments from all over the country, strangers who said her song reminded them of their own lives. One person wrote, "I lost my husband 2 years ago. This song felt like it was written for me." Another said, "She proved that true talent doesn't need glitter or fame, just honesty." She sat reading each message slowly, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling. Every word touched her deeply. For years she had felt invisible, like her life was just one long line of responsibilities that no one noticed. But now, suddenly, people were seeing her for who she really was. Not a tired woman from a small town, but someone with something to give. That evening, she received a call from one of the judges from the show. His voice was warm and kind. "I just wanted to tell you again how much your performance moved us," he said. "I've been in this business for years, but what you did last night was rare. You reminded us why we started loving music in the first place." She didn't know what to say. "Thank you," she whispered, her throat tight with emotion. "I never thought anyone would feel what I felt." "Oh, we all did," he replied. "You didn't just sing a song. You told the truth." After that call, she sat for a long time in silence. She thought about how everything had started, the laughter, the fear, the moment she almost turned back. And then she thought about the promise she had made to her husband. Somehow she felt that he had kept his promise too. Maybe he had guided her through it all. Over the next few days, her story spread even further. Local newspapers printed articles with headlines like, "The Woman Who Made the Audience Cry." A radio station invited her for an interview. She almost said no. The idea of speaking live on air made her nervous, but her children encouraged her. "Mom, this is your moment. You have to share it," they said. So she went. When Ayanim, the host, asked her what made her sing that night, she smiled softly and said, "I just wanted to keep a promise I made to someone I loved. I didn't come to win anything. I came to sing from my heart." The host was silent for a moment, visibly moved. Then he said, "And that's exactly why people love you." After the interview aired, even more people reached out. Invitations came from community events, local concerts, and small charity gatherings. She didn't say yes to all of them. Fame wasn't what she was looking for. But when a local hospital invited her to sing for patients, she agreed immediately. That day became one of the most meaningful of her life. She stood in a small hospital room with just a handful of people, patients in wheelchairs, nurses leaning quietly in the doorway. She sang the same song she had performed on stage. The room filled with tears again, but this time, they weren't from a crowd of strangers. They were from people who needed hope, people who were fighting their own silent battles. After the song, one elderly man reached out his hand and said, "You gave me peace today. Thank you." She held his hand tightly and smiled. "That's all I ever wanted to do," she said. As days turned into weeks, she began to notice how much lighter her heart felt. Singing had healed something inside her. The weight she carried for years seemed to fade little by little. Even her home felt different, not because anything had changed physically, but because joy had returned to it. Her children laughed more, talked more, played music around the house. Her daughters started learning piano, inspired by her mother's courage. One evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table, her daughter said, "Mom, you know what's crazy? Everyone's talking about how brave you were to sing in front of so many people. But to me, you've always been brave. You just didn't know it." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached across the table to hold her daughter's hand. "Maybe you're right," she said softly. "Sometimes we forget how strong we are until life reminds us." Despite all the attention, she remained humble. She still went to work at the bakery, still took the bus, still greeted everyone with a smile. People recognized her now. Sometimes a customer would whisper, "That's the lady from the video," and come up to say, "You were wonderful." Each time she would blush slightly and say, "Thank you, that means a lot." But even with all the admiration, she never saw herself as famous. To her, she was still the same person, someone who just happened to share a piece of her heart and found out that others needed to hear it. A few weeks later, the organizers of the talent show held a small ceremony for the finalists. She didn't expect to win. She had already received the greatest reward she could imagine, peace within herself. When her name was announced as the winner of the Audience Choice Award, she froze in disbelief. The entire hall stood up once again, clapping loudly as she walked to the stage. The host handed her a small trophy and said, "You reminded us that true talent doesn't come from appearance or age. It comes from honesty." She smiled, her voice trembling as she spoke into the microphone. "I never thought I'd be standing here," she said. For a long time, I thought my chance had passed, but I've learned that it's never too late to follow your heart. Thank you for listening, not just to my voice, but to my story. The applause was softer this time, more emotional than loud. People weren't just clapping for a singer, they were clapping for her journey, for the courage it took to step onto that stage, for the years of silence she turned into a song. After the event, as she walked home, the city lights twinkled around her. She held the small trophy close to her chest, not because it was shiny or important, but because it represented everything she had overcome. She thought about her husband again, and for a moment she could almost hear him saying, "I told you they'd hear you someday." That night she placed the trophy on the small shelf beside their wedding photo. She looked at the picture for a long time, whispering, "We did it." Then she turned off the lights, sat by the window, and began writing another song. One about hope, about second chances, about believing in yourself even when the world doubts you. As she wrote, she realized something powerful. The stage that night wasn't just a performance. It was a turning point. It was the moment she found herself again, and even though she had sung to a crowd, her song had really been for one person, the one who had always believed in her when no one else did. Outside, the world went quiet as the stars blinked above. Her pen kept moving across the page, the words flowing easily now, no longer held back by fear. For years she had silenced her dreams. But now, her heart was wide open, ready to sing. Again, not for fame, not for attention, but simply because music was who she was. And as she finished writing the last line, she whispered softly to the empty room, "It's never too late." Months had passed since that unforgettable night on stage, but the memory of it still felt as fresh as yesterday. Sometimes when she walked through town, she would still hear whispers. Not of mockery this time, but of admiration. People would smile at her, wave from across the street, or stop to say how much her song had meant to them. It was strange, she thought, how life could change so quietly, without any warning. One night she had been just another woman trying to survive. The next she had become someone people looked up to, yet she never let any of it change who she was. Every morning she still woke up early to make breakfast for her children, still went to work, still greeted her neighbors with the same gentle smile. Fame wasn't what she had ever wanted. What she wanted was peace, and now finally she had found it. But something else had started to grow inside her too, a feeling that she had more to give. People often wrote to her, asking if she would ever sing again, if she would share more songs, if she could visit their town. At first she wasn't sure how to respond. She wasn't used to people waiting for her voice. But one day she received a letter that made her realize how much her music mattered. The letter was from a young woman who had recently lost her father. She wrote, "Your song helped me when I couldn't even get out of bed. It reminded me that love doesn't end when someone leaves. It just changes. Thank you for giving me the strength to keep going." She read that letter several times, tears streaming down her face. It was then she understood. Her song wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who needed to feel less alone. So she began to sing again. Not on big stages or fancy shows, but in places where people needed light the most. Small community halls, hospitals, schools, and sometimes even on street corners during local events. She didn't need bright lights or microphones. She only needed her voice and her heart. Wherever she went, people listened. They listened not just because her voice was beautiful, but because it was honest. Her songs carried something deeper than words. They carried life. They carried every tear she had shed, every hardship she had faced, every dream she had once buried. At one small event, a little boy came up to her after she finished singing. He couldn't have been more than 7. He handed her a small drawing of her standing on stage with a big smile. "That's you," he said shyly. "You made my mom stop crying." She knelt down, hugged him gently, and whispered, "Then that's the best gift I could ever get." Moments like that reminded her why she kept singing. It wasn't for applause or attention. It was because her songs had a way of finding hearts that needed healing. Over time, she began writing new songs. Each one told a different story, about loss, love, hope, and finding strength in pain. Her lyrics were simple, but they always came from truth. Sometimes she would sing about her husband, and sometimes about her children or the quiet beauty of ordinary life. People told her that her songs felt like conversations with an old friend, warm, honest, and real. As her following grew, she received an invitation to perform at a charity concert for a children's hospital in another city. The organizers said they wanted her to close the night with her famous song, the one that had touched millions. She hesitated at first. The thought of being back on a big stage again made her nervous. But her daughter reminded her, "Mom, this time they won't laugh. They'll listen." So she agreed. The night of the concert, she stood backstage holding her hands together tightly. The hall was packed with hundreds of people and cameras were set up everywhere. Yet this time the fear that once controlled her was gone. She took a deep breath, walked onto the stage, and was greeted by a warm wave of applause. She smiled softly and said, "I used to be afraid of moments like this, but I've learned something important. When you sing from the heart, people don't hear just your voice. They hear your truth." Then she began to sing. The hall fell silent again, just as it had on that first night. Her voice carried through the room, gentle but powerful, filled with emotion that made everyone listen closely. By the time she reached the last line, the audience was on their feet. Some clapped, some cried, but everyone stood together, united by the feeling her song had brought. After the concert, people came to thank her personally. Many shared their own stories, how her music had helped them face loss, how it gave them courage to start again, how it reminded them that kindness still existed. She listened to each one, grateful and humbled. When she returned home, she realized her life had taken on a new purpose. She was no longer just singing for herself. She was singing for everyone who had ever felt invisible or unheard. Every song she wrote became a bridge between her and the people who needed her message. Her children often helped her organize small gatherings in their community, where she would sing for free. Families would come, sit together under string lights and listen. Sometimes she would stop mid-song and share a little story about her life, about the night people laughed at her, and how she turned that laughter into something beautiful. Every time she told it, people smiled through their tears, understanding that courage often begins in the most unexpected moments. She started mentoring young singers too. Many of them were nervous and unsure, just like she once was. She told them, "Don't sing to impress people. Sing to express what's inside you. When you do that, you'll always touch hearts." One of those young singers later went on to win a national competition. During her interview, when asked who inspired her the most, she said, "A woman who sang from her soul and taught me that being real is better than being perfect." Hearing that brought tears to her eyes. She never saw herself as a teacher or an inspiration. She had only followed her heart. But seeing how her journey had lit a path for others filled her with quiet joy. As years passed, her name became known in many places, not as a celebrity, but as a symbol of hope. People started calling her the Heart Singer. Her song continued to spread, used in school performances, charity events, and even in hospitals to bring comfort to patients. She never made a fortune from it, but she gained something far more precious: the respect and love of people everywhere. One afternoon, she was invited to speak at a small event celebrating women who had achieved something remarkable later in life. When she took the stage, she looked at the audience and faces young and old and said, "I used to think my best days were behind me. But sometimes life surprises you. The truth is, it's never too late to begin again." Her words received gentle applause, but more than that, they left an impression on everyone who heard them. People often said her story gave them courage to chase the dreams they had once given up on. On her 50th birthday, her children organized a small concert in her honor. Friends, neighbors, and even some of the judges from the old show came to celebrate. When she walked into the hall, everyone stood and clapped. Tears filled her eyes as she looked around the room, all the faces that had once doubted her, now shining with pride. Her daughter brought her a microphone and said, "Mom, there's only one song that can end this night." She smiled, nodded, and sang the song that started it all, the same song she had sung the night they laughed. But this time, the laughter was replaced with love. Her voice was softer now, touched with age and experience, but still as pure as ever. When she finished, the crowd rose again, clapping, cheering, crying. She bowed her head slightly, overwhelmed. Later that night, after everyone left, she stayed behind for a while. The hall was empty, the lights dimmed. She stood in the middle of the stage, running her fingers along the edge of the microphone stand. For a moment, she closed her eyes and whispered, "We did it," as if speaking to the one who had always believed in her. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that comes from peace, from knowing you've lived your purpose. As she walked out into the night, the cool air touched her face. The stars shimmered above, just like the night she first sang. She felt a quiet certainty in her heart. Her journey wasn't about fame or victory or recognition. It was about proving that no matter who you are, no matter where you start, you can still move hearts with truth. Her story became one that people told again and again. The story of a woman who was laughed at but never gave up, who sang not for applause but for love. And though the years would pass, her song would continue to echo, in the voices of those she inspired, in the lives she touched, and in the hearts that finally believed it's never too late to follow your dreams.